Anastasia. Now I see why the black hole itself has zero mass. The black hole as an object of the non-material world simply creates conditions, a force near which the main action takes place, i.e., roughly speaking, the unnecessary matter is recycled. This is almost like an eraser, a rubber, cleaning the paper surface of inscriptions. Matter vanishes entirely without getting into the black hole itself. And what does the size of the black hole depend on? Rigdon. The size of the black hole depends on the amount of, say, pathological matter. It is impossible to call such matter otherwise, which is subject to annihilation in a given area of the universe. The black hole may be of any size, both big and small. To better understand these processes in outer space, I should perhaps give a very conditional, associative example related to human activity. Imagine that a person needs to mow weeds in a certain part of a clearing. He sees this clearing and calculates how much force he should apply and how much time this work will take. And later, one fine morning, he appears in the clearing and carries out the planned work, which happens, let's face it, quite unexpectedly for the weeds. It is a different matter when there is a whole field of such weeds. In this case, in order to eliminate such a huge amount, the person will use larger capacities, for example, equipment, involvement of additional human resources, and so on. That is, the point of force application depends on the area of pathology, and the method of force application depends on the volume of specific workload. Anastasia. That is a good example. Generally speaking, the question of the origin of mass as such still remains open in contemporary physics. Furthermore, scientists themselves highlight this issue as one of the fundamental ones. Despite the multitude of existing theories and assumptions, it has not been ascertained why some particles have mass while others don't. Earlier, before I became more interested in this subject, I also took mass for granted, as a certain characteristic of any material object. Everyone understands that the elephant is heavier than the fly, so the mass of the elephant is bigger. However, it turned out that when we dive into the microcosm, it isn't all smooth sailing here. Scientists have ascertained that there are particles which they call elementary, with zero mass. One of the representatives of such massless particles, in resting state, is the known to all photon, a quantum of light. Rigdon. Indeed, science cannot yet answer this question because it is limited only by the boundaries of the proposed theories, and these theories, despite the tendency to become more complex, still cannot provide reliable answers to such important questions concerning the deeper understanding of workings of the universe, as for instance, what exactly gives mass to one or another kind of particles, and why do masses of particles differ? It is considered that mass of the body directly depends on the substance which it contains and which consists of atoms. But what constitutes the basis of atoms? According to modern conceptions, atoms consist of electrons, protons, and neutrons. It is assumed that protons and neutrons are formed from quarks, and it is electrons and quarks that are regarded by people as truly elementary particles. Anastasia. Yes, to suppose is not to dispose of. This is the eternal I believe, I don't believe game of logic of the inhabitant of three-dimensional space. What I cannot see with the equipment which is currently available does not exist in principle. Rigdon. Every person has his own way of knowing the truth, sometimes through overcoming numerous trials and errors. However, purity of thoughts and flexibility of mind allow a true scientist to have a broader view of the world and remove the imposed stereotypes. The question is not in the knowledge, but in the human perception. Anastasia. The funniest thing is that once you look impartially at the theoretical descriptions of behaviors of elementary particles, which were proposed over the last 100 years, you get the impression that every theory that follows is trying to cover the gaps where its predecessor showed a crack as a result of the latest experimental discoveries. Maybe a totally different approach to this question is needed. Could you please tell us what mass represents on the global scale? Rigdon. Everything is actually simpler than people think. The amount of matter, its volume, density, etc., as well as the very fact of its presence in the universe, does not affect the total mass of the universe. People are used to perceiving matter with inherent mass solely from the perspective of three-dimensional space. However, in order to have a deeper understanding of the subject, it is necessary to know about the multidimensionality of the universe. Volume, density, and other characteristics of the visible matter with which people are familiar in all their diversity, including the so-called elementary particles, change already in the fifth dimension, yet mass remains unchanged, since it is a part of the general information about life of this matter up to the sixth dimension inclusive. The mass of matter is just information about the interaction of one matter with another under specific conditions. Like I've already said, ordered information creates matter and sets its properties, including mass too. Given the multidimensionality of the material universe, its mass always equals zero. The total mass of matter in the universe will be enormous only for observers from the third, fourth, and fifth dimensions. Anastasia, the mass of the universe equals zero? But this shows the illusory nature of the world as such, which was mentioned in many ancient legends of peoples of the world. Rigdon, science of the future, if it chooses the way indicated in your books, will be able to come close to answering the questions of the origin of the universe and of its artificial creation. Anastasia, there is another question. There are assumptions in modern science that supermassive black holes exist in the nuclei of almost all large galaxies. Is this true? Rigdon, no. This assumption appeared among scientists because active galaxies emit very powerful radiation, and stars move around these centers in such a way as if they were attracted by something which is invisible to modern equipment, but which is very massive. However, there are no black holes in the galactic nuclei. It is just that somewhat different laws exist there. Anastasia, spiral galaxies were one of the first to be discovered. Does the spiral shape play any special role in the micro and macrocosm of the universe? Rigdon, yes, it does, and it relates to the structured motion of energies as well as to the storage and exchange of information, that is to advanced physics. If you study this issue carefully, you will be able to understand that many things in the material world are arranged in a spiral shape or move in a spiral from micro objects to macro objects. For instance, let's take micro objects of our world, such as cytoskeleton of eukaryotic cells. As you remember the definition from biology, eukaryotes are organisms whose cells contain a distinct nucleus. Anastasia, yes, the superkingdom includes all the higher animals and plants, fungi, unicellular and multicellular algae, and protozoa. Rigdon, correct. Inside their cytoskeletal, you will find a linearly twisted spiral, a double helix, and also a superhelical structure. Anastasia, exactly. After all, their cells have a nucleus enclosed within membranes and chromosomes of a helical structure containing biopolymer, which is also a part of living organisms, i.e. the double-stranded DNA molecule. In the majority of cases, the DNA has the structure of the double helix. Even certain bacteria, which are prokaryotic, organisms with undifferentiated nuclei, have a single double-stranded DNA molecule shaped as a circular chain. Rigdon, absolutely right. You may also recall the process of cell division and the participation in it of the chromosome of female cells and chromosomes of male cells. At all stages of the cell cycle, chromonymata are the basis of the chromosome. Anastasia, yes, these thread-like structures. Rigdon, note the following. In a non-dividing cell, they're untwisted, say despiralized. while during the cell division they're tightly twisted in a spiral, figuratively speaking in the shape of two entwined serpents. And so you may remember that the DNA functions include storage of information, its transmission, and implementation of the genetic program of development. Generally, if we examine the biochemistry of animals, including human beings, in more detail, we can find a great variety of types of spirals: left-handed spirals, right-handed spirals, triple-stranded spirals, and so on. For instance, the typical collagen molecule consists of 3 polypeptide chains of different types, A-spirals. They're usually twisted in the form of the right-handed threefold spiral. Yet what is collagen? It is the most widespread, thread-like protein in animal organisms, which makes up nearly 25% of the total amount of protein. It forms the basis of collagenous connective tissue fibers, ensuring its strength and flexibility. Therefore, bones, including cranium, spine, etc., cartilages, and tendons consist of it. Here's another example. What is hair and nails of humans, as well as feathers, claws, quills, and hair of animals? All these structures mostly consist of keratin, horn matter. Keratin, being a structural protein, is also mainly built in the form of a spiral, like for example the structural protein of hair or fur, akeratin. The longest part of its peptide chain is twisted in the right-handed A-spiral, and 2 peptide chains form a single left-handed superspiral. Figuratively speaking, this is an entwined spiral in the shape of 2 serpents. Superspirals, in their turn, are combined into tetramers, and the latter are combined into a more complex structure. 8 of such complex structures form a microfibril of hair or fur. These are simply processes which are visible in the material world and which form at the invisible energy level of the organization of matter. The helical structure is one of the most convenient forms of long-term information storage. Today, science is only now getting closer to this understanding. For example, thanks to the existing DNA testing methods, it is possible to discover many things about the human being and also to perform genetic testing to determine a biological relationship. Previously, blood was used for DNA analysis. Now, a person's saliva, hair, and nails are used for such an analysis. In forensic science, doctors can determine a person's age and gender using a single hair. They can also determine what substances and microelements are present in one's hair, in which period of the person's life there were more or fewer of them in his or her organism. Such data, in turn, point to the person's lifestyle, what medicines he or she took, what he or she ate, etc. The DNA analysis of hair, if you compare it with other samples, allows experts to identify its owner. This method is also used by archaeologists to study various burial places and ancient tombs, since hair is preserved even better than bones. Truth is that this is far from the limit of knowledge. Currently, science stands just on the threshold of perceiving the mysteries of spiral structure, which also exists in abundance in a human, and the interconnection of matter and energies. By the way, the knowledge of all this existed in ancient times, as evidenced by the signs and symbols of ancient people, which were left as inscriptions on ritual items, stones, artifacts from burials, or on symbolic items of architecture, as well as in the echoes of magic rituals which are common almost all over the world among different peoples. By the way, it is not coincidental that rituals were connected with hair, nails, and bones, in other words, with helical structures capable of storing and transferring power, information. Information, or the dormant power as it was called earlier, was activated, awakened, by incantation, that is certain sound vibrations, or by concentrating the power of thought or attention. People use this knowledge both in positive and negative ways. Certainly, similar rituals have remained today, but they have mostly been absurdly distorted. It is already an empty imitation, its meaning lost. Anastasia. Many peoples have different superstitions, even taboos, associated with hair and nails. For instance, it is considered that cut hair and nails must not be scattered about, for they bear certain energy information about their owner and might fall into the hands of an ill-wisher capable of putting them to evil ends. Some peoples even have a spitting taboo. One should not spit right and left because it is considered that a sorcerer might take possession of the saliva in order to curse this person. What if the spitting taboo was introduced for urban residents? Then our culture might improve. Streets would become cleaner, and perhaps people would suffer less from various disorders and diseases of unknown origin. Rigdon. Culture, of course, never hurts. However, it is not a matter of health, taboos, sorcerers, and superstitions. All of this is external, yet it stems from the internal of man himself. It is a matter of habit, the dominance of certain thinking of the individual and of everyday choice. If a person clears his mind of the ideological chaos and introduces spiritual priorities of creation into his life, then no sorcerers with their superstitions will be a hindrance. Anastasia. I totally agree with you. No wonder that examples of negative influence through such helical structures are described nearly at every turn in the popular literature of the contemporary society. Nonetheless, if there are negative examples, there should be positive ones as well. You've mentioned that this knowledge was also used in a positive way. Rigdon. Let's say that initially the knowledge was given to people precisely in a positive way. Let's take hair, for instance. Hair keeps information about a person and the connection with his physical and energy structures. In ancient times, people knew about such a connection of hair with the energy structure, which modern science does not yet understand. Now you can find only echoes of this. For example, the ancient Slavs, just like other nations though, believed that flowing hair gives magical power to a woman, or that a small lock of man's, warrior's, shoulder-length hair, taken exactly from the crown of his head, has magical power too. All this is the echo of former knowledge about the energy structure of the human being and possibilities of its proper use in life in order to help in the spiritual journey. Even a lock of cut hair retains its connection with a person. In the past, when someone from a commune was sent on a long journey for a certain purpose, this person left a lock of his hair to the commune. While he was on a mission, the commune would sit down in a circle from time to time, placing this hair in the center, and do what we would call today a meditation, prayer. In other words, people from the commune, while in an altered state of consciousness, in meditation, would give additional spiritual powers to this person through the lock of hair in order to support him on his mission. By the way, in the past, when a commune intended to provide spiritual support to a certain person, locks of his hair had been preliminarily cut in 3 places for this purpose. And these places sort of symbolized a triangle above his head, on his temples, closer to the point above his ears, and on the back of his head. And then the commune, so to speak, meditated over that cut hair. This was used to help him block the negative state relating to the person's past and suppress surges of his animal nature. Hair was never cut from the forehead because the front part of a person and space before him were seen as a connection with the spiritual direction, with the way forward. In fact, a very real influence, albeit weak and short-term, is exerted over a person through his hair. However, such influence can only reinforce what already dominates in such a personality. In other words, through the hair of a good person, by influencing with the deepest inner feelings, another good person can transfer positive energy and strengthen positive powers inside him for a certain period of time. But of course, the main work on oneself still depends on the personality. Interestingly, in ancient times, the knowledge of such additional power was used in magic rituals solely to provide spiritual assistance to a person, whereas now this knowledge is either distorted or used in a negative way. Somehow, people have forgotten that this knowledge was given to them for the purpose of helping each other. Anastasia. In some modern religions, there are rites of cutting hair. For instance, taking monastic vows in Christianity. shaving off hair among the Muslims who make a pilgrimage to Mecca, shaving heads in Buddhist monastic communities, or shaving the front part of the head among the Chinese, the Manchurians, or the Ainu as a sacrifice to God. What are these rituals based on? Rigdan. All of them are already purely symbolic actions, which in religions are interpreted as the final parting of a person with all of his past and his decision to serve the given religion, which is regarded as a sacrifice to God. In reality, if externally a person cuts or shaves his hair but does not change internally in quality, all this will still remain pure symbolism. I repeat, it is not attributes, clothes, or any outer distinctive appearances that are important, but the internal component of man. For example, the cruciform cutting of hair, or shaving the crown of the head or the forehead, this is already a distorted transfer of knowledge, an interpretation by people themselves, a purely symbolic external demonstration by a person of his connection with God, of his procession along the spiritual path, and his affiliation with this or that religion. Anastasia. So it is not without reason that people say that a person should not be judged by appearance. Going back to the issue of helical forms in micro and macrocosm, I recall that the motion of the electron in the magnetic field, which is constant in time, is also helical. Rigdan. Many natural phenomena are linked to such a motion. Note the large-scale natural phenomena, such as, for example, air cyclones, anticyclones, giant ocean whirlpools, the so-called rings, whose center may be located dozens of meters below the ocean level, regions of spiral turbulence, generations of spiral waves, and so on. The helical structure and the motion of macro objects, such as galaxies, for example. I will say even more about the spiral form in the macrocosm, namely what is unknown to science today but is reflected in ancient creation myths of different peoples. Incidentally, clever people should think about the following questions. Why, despite the obvious variety of possible pictures of the world, the main information different peoples have is surprisingly similar? Furthermore, only in a few cases, such coincidences can be explained by contact between cultures. How did the ancient people know how the universe and life in it were formed, or that the polar cosmic principles have something in common? Why did ancient people perceive the world as an eternal formation, and things existing in it as a fruit of struggle? How did they know about the existence of various spaces densely populated with various gods and spirits, 3, 7, 9, and more heavens, lands, heavenly lands, etc., about the multi-stage universe, the notion of the single fundamental principle of the universe, which assigns form, characteristics, and properties to the world, but is devoid of all these features itself? Why are similarities of quantitative and qualitative characteristics of elements found in myths? And why is it that most often they speak of the 4 elements, water, fire, air, and earth? Why does, in the majority of cases, the 5th central element unite these 4 elements, and all this together is tied to the material basis of the world? For instance, ancient Chinese marked the 5 basic elements of the world with the term Yu Sin. Yu means 5, while the Sin hieroglyph means to act, to move. In other words, the 5 elements being in everlasting motion. They define the development of the world again as an interaction of the 2 opposite cosmic principles, yin and yang. In ancient Indian writings, besides the 4 elements, an important role in the universe was assigned to the soul, Atman, the mind, Manas, and also time, Kala, space, Dik, and such notion as Akasha. The Akasha substance was represented as something indivisible and pervasive. Just a single characteristic feature was attributed to it, sound. It was Akasha that, according to the Indian descriptions, connected all of the above listed substances. That is, the 4 material and the 4 non-material ones. Many sacred legends of the peoples of the world have preserved the knowledge that the human being consists of 5 basic parts. By the way, the ideas of ancient people about life and death were entirely different from the contemporary worldview. Death, according to their worldview, was not the final annihilation of man. Life and death are closely interconnected between themselves and complement one another. Death is regarded in the legends as the transition to a different form of existence. But this transition depends on the spiritual quality of a person's life, and that is why it was said that life begets death and death begets life. To die means to be born again based on one's merit, or to live for a better world. Moreover, this transition to a different world is related to the transformation of man, as well as to crossing the cosmic waters, according to various legends, by boat, on a bird, a horse, a snake, or a fantastic creature. And so, of course, legends of the peoples of the world describe how exactly the universe will perish. Clever people should think about the question how ancient people could have known all this and could think in such large-scale categories. After all, people of the ancient past, in most cases, never saw anything other than the place where they lived, not to mention outer space, let alone the birth and destruction of the universe. Nevertheless, knowledge about the universe existed, and the general essence on which all the cosmological myths of the peoples of the world were based, speaking in a modern language, was as follows. From the world of God, which has different names in various legends, the universal waters, the universal ocean, the world of the primordial, of the Creator, the primordial sound emerged, the mythical bird, the sound, the first logos, the word of God. Sometimes legends mention that the world was created out of chaos. At that, we should understand that the Greek word chaos, meaning gaping, originated from the root K and the word kaino, kesko, meaning yawning, opening wide. So chaos in mythology has the meaning of yawning, a gaping space and an empty stretch. Anastasia. It's almost like the beginning of the Bible, which tells about the creation of the world. The earth was formless and empty, darkness was over the surface of the abyss, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the waters. Rigdon. It is only now that the synodal translation of the Bible has abyss. Originally, in the ancient Mesopotamian text, from which Hebrew priests borrowed the Sumerian and Babylonian cosmology, it was called the primordial universal waters, the sea. And if you look at the meaning of the verb hovering in the original, from which the translation was made, you will notice that the same verb was also applied to a broody hen that hatches its chicks in the nest. And the term the Spirit of God, Ruach Elohim in the English transcription, is derived from the ancient Semitic root and is related to the Arabic ruch. From this root, the name of the giant mythical bird Ruch was formed, and this bird still appears in ancient Arabic tales. Anastasia, you're saying that this biblical story was based on earlier myths of other peoples which described how the world had been created by a big bird hovering over the primordial world ocean? Generally speaking, yes. After all, the motif of pulling the earth out of the primordial waters, specifically by a bird, is a rather widespread myth among the peoples of the world. It turns out that the whole point here is in the motion, action, and creation from above this world. Rigdon. Perfectly true. So the primordial sound gave birth to the universe shaped as a sphere, the universal, cosmic egg, the golden fetus, the primary seed. On the surface of the sphere, under the influence of the forces of Allat, the initial energy which begets life movement, matter started to form. A part of the energy started to turn into matter. Thanks to, again, the forces of Allat, and mythology, the mother of all things, the divine feminine principle of creation, the creating viable principle, the mother bird, the will of God, the power of God's thought, matter began to interact with each other. Previously, I had already described in more detail how exactly the universe was formed. as well as what Allat, time, space, and gravity really are. Anastasia: Yes, I included this information in the books Sensei 4 and Ezoosmos.